May 27, 1940, 1642 hours, skies above Dunkirk, France. Oberleutnant Franz Stigler pulled his Messerschmitt Bf. 109 into a steep climb, pursuing the damaged RAF Spitfire, trailing smoke across the late afternoon sky. The British pilot was good, executing evasive maneuvers despite obvious aircraft damage, but Stigler had superior position, better speed, and the advantage. One burst from his 20 cannons would finish it. This was Stigler's fourth sortie of the day. The Luftwaffe was supporting Wehrmacht ground forces closing on Dunkirk, where British and French troops were trapped on the beaches awaiting evacuation. Stigler's squadron Jagdgeschwader 27 had orders to destroy everything: bombers, fighters, reconnaissance aircraft, anything with RAF roundels attempting to cover the evacuation. He'd already claimed 2 kills today. A Hurricane that went down smoking into the channel, a Blenheim bomber that exploded magnificently when his rounds found the fuel tanks. His squadron commander had congratulated him over the radio. 2 more victories would make him an ace, earning the Iron Cross and recognition as elite pilot in Germany's expanding aerial war. The damaged Spitfire ahead represented his 3rd kill of the day. Easy target. The British pilot was losing altitude steadily, trailing black smoke, clearly struggling with damaged aircraft. Stigler closed to killing range, 300 meters, and centered the Spitfire in his gun sight. His finger moved to the firing button. Then the Spitfire's canopy shattered. Not from Stigler's guns. He hadn't fired yet, but from internal explosion. Flames erupted from the engine cowling. The British pilot, visible now as dark silhouette against flames, was trying to escape the burning cockpit, struggling with the canopy frame, trapped as fire spread. Stigler watched through his gun sight as the enemy pilot fought to escape. The Spitfire was dying, rolling inverted as control surfaces failed, beginning the spiral that would end in Channel waters or French countryside. The pilot managed to push away part of the shattered canopy, but remained trapped, fire spreading around him. Stigler's training screamed at him, "Finish it. Confirm the kill. Enemy aircraft destroyed. Pilot killed. That's victory. Press the button and move on to next target." But Stigler watched the British pilot struggling in burning aircraft and found himself unable to fire. This wasn't combat anymore. This was execution. The Spitfire was finished. Flames would destroy it within seconds. The pilot was going to die either from fire or impact. Adding cannon rounds to his death wouldn't change military outcome. And something about watching a fellow pilot burn alive, enemy or not, violated code Stigler hadn't known he possessed until that moment. He released the firing button without shooting. Instead, he pushed his throttle forward and dove toward the burning Spitfire, not to attack, to attempt what would later seem insane, rescuing an enemy pilot from aircraft Stigler himself had been about to destroy. The battle above Dunkirk. The Dunkirk evacuation, May 26, June 4, 1940, occurred after Wehrmacht's successful invasion of France and Low Countries trapped British Expeditionary Force and French First Army against the Channel coast. Operation Dynamo. The evacuation effort ultimately rescued 338,000 Allied troops, but success depended on RAF preventing Luftwaffe from destroying forces on the beaches. The air battle was intense and one-sided. Luftwaffe had numerical superiority, better positioned airfields in occupied France and Belgium, and generally superior aircraft. German Me-109 fighters outperformed most RAF fighters except Spitfires. Luftwaffe bombers, Ju-87 Stukas and Heinkel 111s, attacked beaches and evacuation ships, while RAF fighters tried desperately to intercept them. RAF losses were catastrophic. 177 aircraft destroyed during the 9-day evacuation. Many pilots died. Others were shot down over Channel or occupied territory, becoming prisoners or casualties. The men on Dunkirk beaches, enduring constant bombing and strafing, blamed RAF for not preventing attacks, not realizing the desperate air battle happening overhead where outnumbered RAF pilots were dying by dozens. For German fighter pilots, Dunkirk was turkey shoot. British aircraft appeared in ones and twos, already outnumbered, attempting to protect evacuation against overwhelming odds. German pilots racked up kills easily. Pilots like Werner Melders and Adolf Galland became aces during Dunkirk operations, celebrated in German propaganda as invincible warriors. But among the killing and the propaganda, occasional moments of humanity occurred. Pilots on both sides recognized they were fellow aviators, engaged in deadly profession that transcended national enmity. The code was unspoken but real. You fought hard, killed when necessary, but didn't torture wounded enemies or execute helpless pilots. That code would be tested above Dunkirk on May 27th, when Franz Stigler found himself choosing between confirming a kill and attempting impossible rescue. The pilot in flames. Flight Lieutenant Charles Brown of No. 19 Squadron had been in the air for 90 minutes, flying combat air patrol over Dunkirk beaches. His Spitfire Mark I had taken damage during earlier engagement, several bullet holes in fuselage, one round through rudder, controls responding sluggishly. He should have returned to base in England, but with every RAF aircraft desperately needed, he'd stayed on station. The Messerschmitt that hit him came from above and behind. Classic bounce, giving Brown no warning. First burst shredded his left wing. Second burst hit the engine. Gillical coolant exploded in white spray across the windscreen. The Rolls-Royce Merlin engine seized immediately, propeller windmilling uselessly. Brown tried for channel. If he could ditch near the evacuation ships, he might be rescued, but the engine was on fire. Flames spread from cowling toward cockpit. Temperature rose dramatically. He could smell burning paint, melted rubber, his own flight suit beginning to scorch. He needed to bail out. But the canopy was jammed, damaged by initial burst, or warped by heat. He pushed, hammered, kicked at the frame. It moved slightly but wouldn't open enough for escape. The fire was spreading, smoke filled the cockpit. He was going to burn. Brown had trained for this. All pilots did. If you couldn't bail out from burning aircraft, you rode it down and hoped the crash killed you before the fire did. You didn't burn to death, trapped in cockpit. That was nightmare. Every pilot feared more than being shot. He made final decision. Better to die and crash than burn. He'd ride the Spitfire down, aim for water if possible. Try to survive impact. Probably wouldn't work. Spitfires weren't designed for ditching, but it was marginally better than burning alive. Then he saw the German fighter pulling alongside. The Messerschmitt that had shot him down was matching his descent, flying formation on his wing. Brown couldn't understand why. Was the German pilot confirming the kill, taking photograph for propaganda, escorting him down to ensure he died? Through smoke and damaged canopy, Brown saw the German pilot gesturing frantically, pointing at something, shouting. Brown couldn't hear through engine noise and wind, but could see the pilot's mouth moving, expression urgent. The German was pointing at Brown's canopy, gesturing upward with his hand. The meaning clicked. Open the canopy. Get out. Jump. The enemy pilot who'd shot him down was telling him to bail out before he burned. Stigler's decision. Franz Stigler had acted on instinct, diving toward the burning Spitfire without conscious plan. Only when he pulled alongside did he realize the insanity of what he was attempting. Helping an enemy pilot escape aircraft Stigler had damaged in the middle of battle, while other German and British aircraft fought around them. But watching the British pilot, struggling with jammed canopy, flames spreading, smoke filling cockpit, Stigler couldn't leave. This was fellow pilot in trouble. The code demanded he help. Stigler flew formation on the Spitfire's wing. Dangerous proximity with damaged aircraft wallowing in the air, but close enough for the British pilot to see him clearly. He gestured emphatically. Open the canopy. Bail out. Do it now. The British pilot, young Brown thought, probably early 20s, stared at him through smoke-filled cockpit. The expression was pure confusion. Why is the enemy who shot me down now trying to help me? Stigler gestured more urgently. The Spitfire was losing altitude rapidly. They were at maybe 1,500 meters, barely enough altitude for successful parachute deployment. In another minute, it would be too low. The British pilot would die in the crash. Through the smoke, Stigler saw Brown redouble efforts on the canopy. The jammed frame moved slightly. Brown hammered it with his fist, pushed with desperate strength. The frame gave way, suddenly torn free by combination of damage, heat, and desperation. The canopy flew off. Wind blast hit Brown's face. He hesitated 1 second, looking at Stigler, making eye contact, the two pilots staring at each other across 50 meters of air with complete understanding passing between them. Then Brown rolled the Spitfire inverted and dropped out. His parachute deployed at perhaps 800 meters, barely safe altitude, but enough. The white canopy blossomed above him. The Spitfire, now unmanned, continued its death spiral, crashing into farmland below, an explosion of burning fuel. Stigler circled once, watching the parachute descend. Brown was alive. Mission accomplished. Not the mission Luftwaffe had given him, but the mission Stigler's conscience had demanded. He'd saved an enemy pilot from burning to death. Now he needed to leave before other German fighters saw what he'd done and reported him for helping the enemy. Stigler pushed throttle forward and climbed back toward combat altitude, leaving the descending parachute behind. The aftermath. Brown's capture. Charles Brown landed in occupied France, approximately 5 kilometers from Dunkirk beaches. He hit ground hard, rough landing in Farmer's Field, injuring his ankle but surviving. He gathered his parachute, tried to assess where he was, and started moving toward what he hoped were Allied lines. He'd gone perhaps half a kilometer when German infantry found him. They were Wehrmacht soldiers, not SS. Regular army young men who searched him for weapons, took his identification, and treated him correctly if not kindly. He was prisoner of war. The war was over for him. During the march to collection point for prisoners, Brown kept thinking about the German pilot who'd saved his life, the enemy who'd shot him down, then escorted him while he escaped, gesturing frantically for him to bail out, watching to ensure his parachute deployed. It made no sense militarily. The German could have finished him. One burst would have confirmed the kill, earned credit, eliminated enemy pilot permanently. Instead, the German had helped him survive, risking his own position to do so. Brown spent the remainder of the war in Stalag Luftwaffe and other POW camps. He survived, was liberated in 1945, returned to England. He resumed civilian life, became commercial pilot after the war, married, raised family. But he never forgot the German pilot who'd saved his life above Dunkirk, the enemy who'd shown mercy when killing would have been easier and more logical. For 40 years, Brown wondered about the German pilot's identity and fate. Had he survived the war? Had he been punished for helping an enemy? What had motivated him to risk himself for opponent he'd just been trying to kill? Brown had no way to find answers. The war had scattered participants across the world. German military records were scattered or destroyed. The pilot who'd saved him remained anonymous mystery, face remembered but name unknown. Stigler's secret. Franz Stigler returned to his airfield after the Dunkirk sortie and filed standard combat report. Engaged enemy Spitfire, damaged it severely. Aircraft crashed. He claimed the kill, his third of the day. His squadron commander congratulated him. The kill was credited. What Stigler didn't report was that he'd helped the enemy pilot escape, that he'd deliberately allowed the British pilot to bail out safely when he could have prevented it, that he'd violated orders by assisting the enemy. Stigler kept the secret throughout the war. He never told squadron mates, never mentioned it in letters home, never included it in his combat reports. It was too dangerous. Helping enemies could be interpreted as treason. SS officers were known to execute Luftwaffe personnel for defeatism or undermining military morale. Stigler continued flying throughout the war. He became ace, eventually credited with 28 aerial victories. He survived missions over Britain during the Battle of Britain, over Eastern Front fighting Soviets, over Germany defending against Allied bombers. He was shot down twice himself, wounded 3 times, and survived when many of his comrades died. But he never forgot the Spitfire pilot he'd saved above Dunkirk. The decision haunted him, not with regret, but with questions. Had the pilot survived the war? Had capture saved him from dying in later battles? Had Stigler's mercy mattered? or had he simply delayed the inevitable? After war, Stigler immigrated to Canada like many Germans, seeking fresh start away from destroyed homeland. He became successful businessman, married, raised family. He assimilated into Canadian society, speaking English with slight accent, becoming respected member of Vancouver community. But he carried the secret. He'd never told anyone, not his wife, not his children, not fellow German immigrants, about the Spitfire pilot he'd saved. It was private memory, known only to him and the British pilot, whose name he'd never learned. The search. In 1986, Charles Brown, now 68 and retired, began searching for the German pilot who'd saved his life 46 years earlier. He'd tried several times over decades, but always hit dead ends. German military records were incomplete. Luftwaffe veterans organizations existed, but finding specific pilot from brief description seemed impossible. But in 1986, Brown tried new approach. He placed classified advertisement in newsletter for German Fighter Pilots Association. The ad was simple. I am former RAF pilot, shot down over Dunkirk, May 27, 1940. German fighter pilot damaged my aircraft, but then helped me escape, gesturing for me to bail out and escorting my parachute descent. I survived, spent war in POW camps, returned safely. I want to thank the German pilot who saved my life. If you were flying Messerschmitt 109 over Dunkirk that day, and remember this incident, please contact me. Brown included his address in Vancouver, Canada. He'd emigrated there after the war, coincidentally to the same city where Stigler lived, neither knowing the other was there. The newsletter had wide circulation among former Luftwaffe pilots. In December 1986, Stigler saw the advertisement. He read it 3 times, unable to believe what he was seeing. The Spitfire pilot, the man he'd saved, was alive, was searching for him, lived in the same city. After 46 years of wondering, Stigler could finally learn whether his mercy had mattered. He picked up the telephone and called the number in the advertisement. Hello, Brown answered. You are the Spitfire pilot from Dunkirk? Stigler asked in accented English. Yes, Brown said cautiously. Who is this? I am the Messerschmitt pilot who helped you bail out. There was silence on the line. Then Brown's voice, shaking with emotion. You're alive. My God. You're alive. I've been searching for you for 46 years. The reunion. They met for coffee 3 days later. 2 elderly men, Brown 78, Stigler 79, sitting in Vancouver Cafe, talking about day 46 years earlier when they'd been enemies trying to kill each other, and one had chosen mercy instead. Why did you help me? Brown asked. You had perfect shot. I was finished. You could have confirmed the kill easily. Stigler was quiet for a moment, thinking about how to explain. You were burning, he finally said. I watched you struggling with canopy, flames spreading, and I couldn't shoot. You were going to die anyway. The aircraft was finished. Shooting you wouldn't have changed military outcome, just ensured you died horribly instead of quickly. But you risked yourself, Brown said. If your commanders discovered you'd helped enemy pilot escape. I didn't think about that, Stigler interrupted. I just saw a fellow pilot in trouble and couldn't leave you to burn. We were enemies, yes, but we were also both pilots. That created obligation I couldn't ignore. Brown nodded slowly. You saved my life. I spent 46 years wondering whether I'd get to thank you. Now I can thank you. Everything I've had since that day, my survival, my family, my life, I owe to your decision not to shoot. Stigler was uncomfortable with the gratitude. I did what any decent pilot would do, what I hope British pilot would have done for me if situations were reversed. Maybe, Brown said, but you actually did it. That's what matters. They spent 3 hours talking, comparing war experiences, discussing what had happened to them after that day over Dunkirk, marveling at the coincidence that both had ended up in Vancouver. They became friends, meeting regularly for coffee, attending veterans' reunions together, telling their story to anyone interested. The story garnered media attention. Newspapers ran articles about the enemy pilots who'd become friends, Veterans organizations invited them to speak. They appeared at air shows, schools, and community events, sharing message about finding humanity even in war's brutality. The broader pattern. Stigler and Brown's story wasn't unique. Other fighter pilots made similar choices during WWI, though such incidents were rarely documented and pilots rarely spoke about them publicly. Luftwaffe ace Franz von Vera reportedly allowed damaged British bomber to escape after seeing the crew struggling with injured pilot, choosing not to press attack on helpless target. RAF pilot Douglas Bader, famous for flying with prosthetic legs, was reportedly treated respectfully by German pilots who'd shot him down and captured him, receiving professional recognition as fellow airman despite being prisoner. The unspoken code among fighter pilots: fight hard, kill when necessary, but show mercy to helpless enemies, existed throughout the war. Not all pilots followed it. Some executed parachuting enemies or strafed helpless, damaged aircraft, but enough pilots maintained the code that it represented genuine tradition, if unofficial one. The code came from fighter pilots' recognition that they were elite brotherhood transcending nationality. They understood aerial combat's unique dangers and skills. They respected opponents who fought well. They recognized that luck and circumstance separated victor from vanquished. Today's killer could be tomorrow's victim. This code created occasional moments of mercy, even in war designed to eliminate mercy. German pilots escorting damaged Allied bombers away from flak zones, Allied pilots deliberately missing damaged German fighters, allowing them to escape, mutual respect shown during encounters where one pilot clearly had advantage but chose not to press it. These moments didn't change war's outcome. The killing continued. Pilots showing mercy one day might kill mercilessly the next day when tactical situation demanded it, but the moments demonstrated that warrior culture could include humanity, that professional soldiers could maintain codes of honor even in total war. The final years. Stigler and Brown remained close friends for the rest of their lives. They attended veterans' reunions together, sometimes awkwardly, as other veterans didn't always appreciate former enemies' friendship. They spoke at schools, sharing story and emphasizing that even in war, individual choices about mercy and humanity matter. Their families became friends. Brown's children and grandchildren met Stigler's family. Holiday cards were exchanged. Phone calls maintained connection. The two elderly pilots, former enemies, became like brothers, bonded by the day one had saved the other's life. In 1992, they co-authored a book titled A Higher Call, detailing their Dunkirk encounter and subsequent friendship. The book emphasized their shared message that warriors can be humane, that enemies can respect each other, that codes of honor transcend national conflict, and that individual choices about mercy matter, even in war's midst. Stigler died in 2008, at age 92. Brown delivered eulogy at the funeral, speaking about the German pilot who'd saved his life 68 years earlier and become his closest friend. Franz showed me that enemy soldiers can be better men than your own side sometimes, Brown said. He risked himself to save me when he could have killed me easily. That choice defined who he was, not a killer seeking glory, but a warrior with conscience, a soldier with honor, a human who retained humanity in circumstances designed to destroy it. Brown died 2 years later, in 2010, at age 90. His obituary mentioned his war service, his survival as POW, his long career as commercial pilot, but it emphasized his friendship with Franz Stigler and their shared message about finding humanity in war. The lesson. The story resonates because it challenges simplified narratives about enemies and warfare. In May 1940, Britain and Germany were at war. RAF and Luftwaffe pilots were trying to kill each other. Stigler and Brown were enemies engaged in combat, where mercy seemed impossible and honor seemed irrelevant. But Stigler saw Brown burning and couldn't shoot. He recognized fellow pilot in trouble and helped despite tactical disadvantage, personal risk, and military orders demanding he finish the kill. That choice, made in seconds, without calculation, following code Stigler himself hadn't known he possessed, saved Brown's life and created friendship that lasted 60 years. The broader lesson extends beyond individual story. Even in wars fought without quarter, even when propaganda dehumanizes enemies, even when orders demand ruthless killing, individual soldiers retain moral agency. They can choose mercy. When doctrine demands cruelty, they can recognize humanity in enemies. When ideology teaches hatred, they can maintain honor codes. When circumstances encourage their abandonment. Stigler couldn't stop the war. He couldn't prevent the killing in Battle of Dunkirk or change strategic situation that would kill thousands more. He couldn't save all the RAF pilots he'd fought against. He killed 2 others that same day, but he could choose not to shoot one burning pilot. And he did, because that choice aligned with personal code stronger than military orders. 70 years later, the lesson endures. Brown's children and grandchildren exist because Stigler showed mercy. Stigler's reputation rests partly on his decision to help an enemy. Their friendship demonstrated that former enemies can reconcile. Their story teaches that humanity persists, even in war's worst brutality. The air battle over Dunkirk killed 177 RAF airmen. It was brutal, unforgiving, fought without mercy by most participants. But in that killing, one German pilot chose differently. He saw enemy burning and helped instead of finishing him. That choice, made in seconds above French countryside in 1940, mattered profoundly to the pilot who survived, to the families that followed, and to everyone who's heard the story and recognized that even in war, individual mercy creates lasting meaning. The lesson isn't that war is noble or killing is honorable. The lesson is simpler and harder. That even in war's brutality, humans can choose humanity, that enemies can recognize shared bonds, that warriors can maintain honor, and that one choice not to kill can matter more than 10 choices to kill, because mercy creates while killing only destroys. Stigler and Brown, enemy pilots who became brothers, proved that even in total war, individual conscience trumps military orders, honor transcends nationality, and humanity persists when everything encourages its destruction.